Cold Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My riding of Bonnyville-Cold Lake is the home to many unemployed energy workers who can't believe what they're seeing. The Premier's top oil advisor, Zipporah Berman, is actually chairing a new agreement between the BC NDP and the Greens, which is built on their election promise to kill the Kinder Morgan. On Twitter, she called for the deal to be a turning point for our climate. It's time for the Premier to pick a side. Is she with Zipporah Berman, or is she with Alberta Jobs?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, making life better means a strong oil and gas industry, and that is why we are committed to ensuring that Albertans get full value for their resources through pipeline approvals, of which we have secured 2. That is also why, Mr. Speaker, we're committed to working with industry on a strong clean tech a component to our climate leadership plan, and that is why we are moving forward with innovation investments, Mr. Speaker. It's also why we are working with industry with respect to oil sands emissions. When we conclude that work with industry, we'll be moving on in terms of the detail around our innovation investments. I'm happy to speak about those in the supplement.
First supplement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier is subsidizing Mrs. Berman's activities with Albertans' money. Hundreds of engineers are here today to say this is disgraceful, given that the Premier is refusing to stand up for Albertans and fire Ms. Berman, and is she willing to bear the responsibility if some of her oil sands advisors are successful in killing our pipeline?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the Oil Sands Advisory Group is made up of companies like Cenovus, Athabasca, CNRL, Meg Energy, Suncor. They've endured endless reputational attacks, Mr. Speaker, from the Wild Rose. They've endured conspiracies, having their names dragged through the mud, all for the alleged crime from the Wild Rose, Mr. Speaker, of daring to say that, yes, we can grow our investment in the oil sands, but we can also reduce our emissions, Mr. Speaker. And for that, the Wild Rose talks them down, Mr. Speaker. For that, the Wild Rose says that, we need to drag their names through the mud, Mr. Speaker. It's simply not acceptable.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Second supplement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those are companies I respect in my constituency, and given that this government has a long history of environmental activism from the Environment Minister, who helped edit a book called An Action a Day Keeps Global Capitalism Away, the Education Minister stood on the steps of this very legislature and chanted, "No new approvals." Why should energy workers in Bonnyville-Cold Lake trust this government when it's so painfully obvious that this government wants to shut down our oil sands?
Good question.
At least you recycle something.
The Honourable Minister.
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of oil sands companies that have told us and have told the public that they would like to reduce their emissions while continuing to produce oil sands. And when they say those things, Mr. Speaker, we believe them. And that is what we have done on this side of the House. When those companies come to us and say, yes, we can be a global leader, we don't shout them out of the room. We believe them. When they say to us, we want to work with environmental groups, with communities, with First Nations, with the government in order to move this province forward, we don't shout Cenovus or Athabasca or Suncor or CNRL out of the room. We don't drag their names through the mud. The Wild Rose does that.